Yamato movie review. So this is part of my scripted movie review series in which I go back through my blog archives and look at some of the old movie reviews I've written and try and make YouTube videos out of it for whatever it may be worth. This movie is a movie that was released in Japan in 2005. I didn't actually get around to seeing it until 2007, a couple years later, when it happened to be broadcast on Japanese TV. I was living in Japan at the time. So a bit of background on this movie. The Japanese title is Okoto Tachi no Yamato, which goes by various different English translations. I was on Wikipedia just now, and they translate it as Yamato. So I guess that's the title I'm using in the title of this video. I translated it on my blog at the time as the Men of Yamato, which if memory serves, I don't think I made that up myself. I think I got that from like the Japan Times, or like that's how it was being referred to in English media at the time. Wikipedia, I was just checking their article now, and they said it probably should be translated as the men's Yamato instead of the men of Yamato. Which, yeah, my Japanese is getting a little bit rusty, but actually that might be right. Okoto Tachi no Yamato means it belongs to the men. I don't know. Right, so when I was living in Japan in kind of 2004, 2005, this movie got some publicity, which I followed in the English language publications in Japan. So something like the Japan Times, which is published inside Japan but published in English, kind of targeting expatriates like me who are living in Japan. China and Korea and kind of the various other Asian countries around Japan were a little bit upset when this movie was coming out, because this was a movie about World War II, and this is a sensitive subject in that region. Kind of China and Korea have kind of a different view sometimes of Japan's war guilt than Japan has. Or I don't know, it's complicated. Everything's complicated. I think there's maybe a tendency for us as kind of foreigners looking in on Japan to kind of saying, you know, Japan thinks this, or this is the way the Japanese people think. But actually, every Japanese person probably thinks a little bit differently. And really, if you want to get into it, there are probably all sorts of like internal contradictions within a certain person's political views. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. I guess the point is maybe it's going to be a little bit complicated or contradictory to try and simplify the different views going on into kind of something coherent. But anyways, Yamato was a big Japanese battleship. This was an actual, real historical battleship. It was the pride of the Japanese fleet. It was sunk by American planes, but its glory has kind of lived on, and it's kind of become a symbol in Japan. There was a 1970s Japanese anime series about Yamato being resurrected and turned into a spaceship and having kind of further adventures out in outer space. And there was like a famous... I actually have never sat down and seen the anime series, but as somebody who was interested in kind of old Japanese music when I was living in Japan, the theme song from this 1970s anime was kind of hit the charts and was quite popular as like a Japanese music at the time. I don't think the 1970s cartoon was explicitly supposed to be like right-wing or militaristic, but occasionally the battleship itself has become a symbol for Japan's right-wing or Japan's militaristic section. So when it became known that there was a movie being made about the battleship Yamato. China and Korea got a little bit upset about this. The director of the movie, however, replied that he was not making a pro-war film. He was making an anti-war film. But some people accused him of making a pro-war film disguised as an anti-war film. I remember reading about this controversy a bit in the Japan Times. Interestingly enough, I was just on the Wikipedia page just now to try and kind of brush up on this before I filmed this video. And the Wikipedia page has kind of nothing about the controversy, which, I don't know, maybe this is just kind of all faded from memory, or maybe I'm misremembering things and it wasn't as big a deal as I seem to remember it been. I seem to remember, though, there being a controversy about this being a pro-war film disguised as an anti-war film. Which is an interesting accusation, and I think at various points, yeah, there are a lot of movies, maybe in the US, that there's a debate whether this is a pro-war film or an anti-war film. Take Saving Private Ryan as an example. Saving Private Ryan, I think you could interpret that as an anti-war film because it shows everything these guys went through, and it doesn't like glorify war as like a fun adventure, right? They are storming the shores of Normandy, and you watch this, and you get the sense why, like, wow, this was traumatic. Like, war is hell. These guys are going through hell to kind of storm these beaches. Pardon my language, but you know that's the best way you can describe it. At the same time, though, is a film like Saving Private Ryan sending the message that, you know, this was hell and these boys went through hell, but it was worth it. You know, in the end, they won and they saved the world, and yeah, you know, you've got that ending scene at the very end of Saving Private Ryan where they kind of fade into the American flag in the cemetery, which is a little bit debatable maybe, but seemed to be, when I saw it, it seemed to be sending the message to me like, you've got to respect what these guys did. You know, they went through hell to kind of save us or to kind of make America better, which is, yeah, kind of sending, at that point it's not really an anti-war film anymore. It's kind of almost becoming a pro-war film, like these guys did what needed to be done. This is where kind of the thin line comes between what's a pro-war film and what's an anti-war film. Now that's an American perspective. Japan can't do that. Japan can't say these young men went through hell, but in the end they saved the country, right? Japan would be like, these young men went through hell, and in the end we still lost anyways, so it was completely meaningless. I mean, that's got to be the Japanese perspective, and that's probably why Japan has not made a lot of pro-war films in the last kind of 60 years, 70 years, however long it's been. Yeah, and you know, if you've lived in Japan or at all familiar with Japanese culture, then you know that pacifism and anti-war themes are kind of very popular with the majority of the Japanese population. There is like a small right-wing militaristic section of Japan, and this kind of tends to get a lot of press and stuff like that, but that doesn't represent the majority of Japanese views at all. They seem to have kind of learned from World War II to have a very anti-war view as kind of the majority of Japanese people. So the best thing a Japanese pro-war film can do, I mean, they can't say that war is a bunch of fun. They can't say that, you know, there's a huge sacrifice, but then it was worth it, because it wasn't worth it. The best they can do is show kind of a lot of clean-cut young men going out in a blaze of glory to make a heroic sacrifice for their country. which is more or less what this film does. There are parts of this film which definitely seem to be anti-war, but there are other parts of this film which struck me as glorifying the Japanese military. This is a long debate, and I'm not going to try and put the final word on it here. There are some very poignant moments in the film, such as when the 16 and 17-year-old boys who sail in the Yamato are back home to say one last goodbye to their families before they go off to die for their country. Now, it was explained to me that the Japanese people at that time, the young Japanese soldiers, had been educated that it was good to go off and die for their country. So they're being kind of told, go off and have a good death for your country. Now you're watching this scene, and if you're at all familiar with like a movie like All Quiet on the Western Front, you're just waiting for somebody to say, no, it's not good to go off and die for your country. So, for example, that scene from All Quiet on the Western Front, when the soldier comes back home and he sees the speeches that are being made. It's sweet and beautiful to die for your country, and I'm reviewing a different movie here, All Quiet on the Western Front. But there's that famous scene from the movie when he goes back to his high school class and he confronts his old teacher, and he says, "You still think it's beautiful and sweet to die for your country, don't you? We used to think you knew. The first bombardment taught us better. It's dirty and painful to die for your country. When it comes to dying for your country, it's better not to die at all. There are millions out there dying for their country, and what good is it?" So that's All Quiet in the Western Front. This never happens in the Men of Yamato. But then, this never happened in real life. I mean, these young Japanese boys who were being sent off to die for their country, in real life, nobody ever came to them and said, no, it's dirty and painful to die for your country. We as the audience seek that catharsis of having like somebody kind of vocalize what we're all thinking. But that's us as the audience. So maybe it's truer to life, or kind of a more realistic view, to have these kind of kids get sent out with nobody actually kind of coming up and saying to them, no, don't do it. The closest the film gets, there's a departing scene. Sorry, get a little bit emotional sometimes. There's a departing scene when one of the kids is going off, and the kid has been told, go out and die for your country. And then the mother gets emotional and she runs after him and she says, don't die. And that's the closest the movie gets to this kind of cathartic scene from All Quiet on the Western Front. It's just that simple sentence, don't die. So that seems to me, especially kind of knowing the history of Japan, where these kids were kind of sent out to die for their country, that seemed to me that would kind of be the stand in the anti-war theme there. But then, on the final battle, when the Yamato is being attacked by the American planes, these young men are with kind of their dying breath doing kind of everything they can to fight for their country. So like even sorry, looking for my notes here. Yeah. even after they kind of get hit and they're wounded, they're still trying to kind of grab on the guns and doing everything they can to shoot down the American planes. The movie seemed to me to be kind of glorifying that kind of heroic determination. Kind of like, you know it's a losing cause, but you're doing everything you can to fight for your country towards your dying breath. And at that point, the movie seemed to me to be kind of not so anti-war, to be, at the very least, glorifying this kind of blind patriotism or blind determination that these young men had. I don't know. Maybe you can do both in a movie. Maybe you can't. It does seem to be feeding into this trend in Japan, at least in the years I lived there, as being anti-war in the sense that war is bad because we suffered. So a lot of Japanese media is kind of, the emphasis is always on how much the Japanese people suffered during the war. There was never any movies in Japan, certainly when I was there, that I was aware of, where the message was, war is bad because we did bad things. In other words, the Japanese never made movies about the bad things they did in China or the bad things they did in Korea. They just would make anti-war movies about how much the Japanese people suffered during the war, or how all these young men went out to die senseless deaths. Yeah, and that seems to me to be a bit of an omission. Now, I don't know, arguably American movies, well, I mean, American movies, you know, if you have like something like Platoon or Apocalypse Now or Born on the 4th of July, do seem to kind of show that Americans were doing bad things in Vietnam. So we as Americans maybe are arguably, well, I don't know. These kind of American movies where you've kind of show the American soldiers doing bad things and in a bad light seem to be kind of further along in self-reflection than Japanese movies ever are. On the other hand, arguably maybe these things go in cycles, because all those movies I just kind of mentioned were kind of from the late 70s or 80s. We haven't had any movies out like that for a while, or have we? Maybe I'm forgetting something. I think, I've not actually seen a lot of these movies, but I'm given to understand that kind of in the 1960s and 70s, Japan produced some kind of some war movies that were looking critically at Japan's involvement in the Philippines or China and stuff like that. And then those went out of fashion after a while. So maybe these things kind of go in cycles. Yeah, it's a bit difficult to say. Anyways, yeah, what to say about this movie, huh? It seems to me like a bit of a confused movie. Probably worth checking out anyways, even if it's not sending a clear message. It's interesting. I don't think they ever officially released this movie with English subtitles, but I'm told that there are kind of amateur subtitle versions available on the internet or something like that. Yeah, check it out if you get a chance.